The Echo of Silence. Introduction. They say that silence speaks, if you know how to listen to it, but there are certain silences that are better left unheard. My name is Daniel Vega, and what I am going to tell you today happened just 3 months ago in the small town of Valle Umbrio, a place that does not even appear on modern maps. I warn you, this story is not for the faint of heart. And if you are alone at home, maybe you should turn on all the lights. Part 1. The Return. I never thought I would return to Valle Umbrio. After 15 years, the town was exactly the same. The same stone houses, the same persistent fog, the same cold air that seems to caress your neck when you least expect it. I returned to sell my grandmother's house. No one had set foot in it since her death 6 years ago. 6 years in which no one dared to cross the threshold of that door. 6 years of absolute silence. The key squeaked in the rusty lock. The musty smell hit me immediately. But there was something else, something I couldn't quite place. Old smell. Welcome home, I whispered to myself. But the house responded with a creaking sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Part 2. The Whispers. The first night was strange. I decided to stay in the house despite everything. A mistake, I now know. At 3:27 in the morning, I was awakened by a sound. It wasn't just any noise. It was like someone was whispering very close to my ear. Unintelligible words, but clearly words. I turned on the light. Nothing. Total silence. I convinced myself it had been a dream and went back to sleep. But the next morning I found something disturbing. All the photographs in the house were facing the wall. Every single one of them. I put them back, blaming it on a draft during the night. But deep down I knew that was impossible. Part 3. The Discovery. On the third day, while I was going through papers in the attic, I found a diary. It was my grandmother's, but I didn't remember ever seeing it. The first few pages were normal, every day. Until I came to an entry dated October 15, 1976. I've seen it again. It's on the walls. It's in the air. It watches me when I sleep. It whispers my name. I know it wants something, but I don't know what it is. I need to find a way to silence it before it's too late. A chill ran down my spine. I continued to read page after page, each one more disturbing. My grandmother described a presence in the house, something that fed on loneliness and fear. I dropped the diary when I heard footsteps above my head. It was impossible. It was in the attic. There was no upper floor. Part 4. The Revelation. That night I dug deeper. I spoke to the few remaining neighbors in the village. No one wanted to talk about my grandmother or the house. Except for an old woman named Elisa. Your grandmother didn't die of natural causes, she told me, her voice shaking. No one did. None of the people who lived in that house. She told me the story of Shadow Valley. How the house had been built on the remains of an old sanatorium where experiments were performed on patients. How the screams of those people still echoed in the walls. But the worst thing, Elisa continued, is that when you hear their voices, it means they've already chosen you. Part 5. The Mirror. Back at the house, I decided to look for evidence. In the basement, I found an old, full-length mirror. It was covered with a sheet and surrounded by strange symbols painted on the floor. When I removed the sheet, the mirror didn't reflect the room. It reflected the same room but different. Like it was the same house but in another time. And in that reflection, I saw figures moving in the shadows. I tried to cover it again, but the sheet fell to the floor. Over and over. The mirror didn't want to be hidden. And then I saw it. In the reflection behind me, a tall, thin figure. No defined face. Watching me. I turned sharply. Nothing. But when I looked at the mirror again, the figure was closer. Much closer. Part 6. The Final Night. That night, the whispers grew louder. They were no longer unintelligible. I could understand them clearly. There are many of us, they said. And now you are one of us. At midnight, all the doors in the house slammed shut. The windows sealed themselves shut. And then I realized the truth. I wasn't trying to sell my grandmother's house. The house was trying to keep me. I ran upstairs looking for a way out. But every room led me to another room and then another, in an impossible maze. And in every room that damn mirror followed me. Always reflecting something that shouldn't be there. Part 7. The Echo of Silence. Finally, exhausted, I gave up in the main hallway. The lights flickered. The air turned cold as ice. And then I felt it, a hand on my shoulder. I turned slowly and saw nothing. But the touch was still there. Invisible but real. What do you want? I screamed desperately. The answer came like an echo in my head. Company. At that moment, all the mirrors in the house shattered simultaneously. And from each shard of glass came a whisper, a voice, a scream. Conclusion. It's been 3 months since that night. How did I escape? That's the problem. I'm not sure I did. I sold the house, yes. Or at least the papers say I did. But every night when I close my eyes I seem to be back in those rooms. And every morning I find the photographs of my house facing the wall. And sometimes when I'm alone and everything is quiet, I hear whispers. Voices that call me. That tell me the house is waiting for me. That it will always wait for me. Because the real horror isn't in the house. It's in the echo of silence that haunts you forever. And now I wonder, are you listening to this alone? Are you sure those creaks you hear are normal? That shadow in the corner was always there? Because once you know the echo of silence, it knows you too. The last broadcast. Introduction. There are places in this world that should never be disturbed. Places where the barrier between our reality and something else becomes dangerously thin. My name is Marcos Herrera. I am a paranormal investigator. Or at least, that was before what happened at the old abandoned radio station in Cerro Negro. What you are about to hear is the transcript of my final recording. Listen carefully. It may be the last time you hear my voice. Part 1. The invitation. It all started with an anonymous email. An attachment with radio recordings from 40 years ago. Nightly broadcasts from a local station that went off the air in 1985 after a mysterious incident. The recordings were normal at first. Music, commercials, the host talking about the weather. But in the final seconds of each broadcast, if you turn the volume all the way up, you could hear something disturbing. Overlapping voices, speaking backwards, mentioning a specific date. Yesterday's date. My professional curiosity led me to Cerro Negro, a mining town virtually uninhabited since the mines closed in the 1990s. The radio station was still standing, abandoned on top of a hill. I should have paid attention to the warning signs. Part 2. The ascent. The road to the station was littered with no trespassing and danger signs. Weeds had devoured the path as if nature itself wanted to prevent access. As I ascended, my electronic equipment began to behave strangely. My phone showed incoming calls that were cut off at the first ring. The compass spun uncontrollably. The temperature suddenly dropped about 10 degrees, even though it was midsummer. The station appeared before me like a metallic skeleton against the cloudy sky. A 3-story structure with a huge rusty antenna on the roof. The windows were broken and the walls were covered in graffiti. But there was something odd about the graffiti. They all repeated the same phrase over and over, "Don't transmit." They're listening. Part 3. The ground floor. I entered through a side door that hung on its hinges. The interior was surprisingly intact, as if time had flowed differently in there. In the reception area, a calendar still marked the date, October 17, 1985. The day of the last official transmission. The strange thing was that there was no dust on it, unlike the rest of the room. At the end of the hallway I found a mummified corpse of what looked like a cat. It was in an unnatural position, as if it had died trying desperately to escape. Suddenly the building's emergency speakers crackled. Impossible, I thought, the electricity had been out for decades. But then I heard a distorted voice, "Welcome to the final broadcast." Part 4. The second floor. I climbed the stairs, my heart racing. The second floor housed the administrative offices. The desks were still there, papers scattered about, as if the workers had fled in the middle of their shift. On one of the desks I found an internal report dated the day before the shutdown. It detailed anomalies in the nightly broadcasts. Unexplained interference. Unauthorized voices interrupting programs. Calls from terrified listeners who claimed the station was speaking to them personally, revealing their darkest secrets. The report ended with an urgent recommendation: close the station immediately. Whatever we're picking up, it's not from this world. As I read, the lights in the hallway, which were inexplicably working, began to flicker. And with each flicker I thought I saw a figure at the end of the corridor. A humanoid silhouette, but too tall, too thin. Part 5. The recording room. The third floor was the heart of the station. The control room and recording studios. All the equipment was still there, covered in a thin layer of dust. The surprising thing was that when I approached the main console, the on-air lights came on by themselves. In the center of the recording room was a single microphone suspended from the ceiling. It seemed to be swinging slightly, as if someone had just let go of it. I moved closer and noticed that the air around the microphone was colder. Much colder. My breath was forming clouds of steam. On the wall behind the microphone, someone had written in what looked like dried blood, "The airwaves never die. The transmission never ends." Part 6. The forbidden frequency. Curiosity got the better of fear. I turned on the equipment, which surprisingly started up without any problems. The needles on the meters came to life. I put on my headphones and turned the dial, searching for any signal. There was only static until I came to 107.9 FM. A frequency that, according to the documents I had found, had never been officially used. What I heard made my blood run cold. A voice that sounded exactly like mine was narrating, in the present tense, everything I had done since I entered the building. Every step, every thought. And now, my own voice said in the headphones, you realize that you have made a terrible mistake. That you should never have come here. That you will never get out. I ripped off the headphones, but the voice continued. It was now coming directly from the speakers in the room. Radio waves are interesting, my voice said, but in a tone I had never used. They travel forever through space. They never die. Like us. Part 7. The Revelation. Then I understood. The station wasn't picking up signals. It was attracting them. Like a spider's web attracts insects. On the opposite wall appeared a mirror that I was sure hadn't been there before. But what it reflected wasn't the room I was in, but a different, darker version. And in that version there were dozens of figures. People with expressions of terror frozen on their faces, as if caught in the middle of an eternal scream. One of those faces was that of the announcer whose photograph I had seen at the entrance. The one who had disappeared on the last day of broadcasting. The static on the radio intensified, forming a pattern that began to sound like words. We are all frequencies. Vibrations in the void. And now you will be too. Part 8. The Final Transmission. The doors slammed shut. The windows went dark. The needle on the dial began to move on its own, going through the entire spectrum over and over again. With each passing frequency, a new voice joined the chorus of sounds. Pleading voices. Voices begging for help. The center microphone began to descend toward me, like a snake stalking its prey. We just need a new announcer, the radio said in my voice. The broadcast must continue. Always. My body moved against my will, moving me closer to the microphone. It was as if I had become a puppet. I felt my mouth open involuntarily. Words that were not my own began to fall from my lips. Good evening, listeners. Welcome to your evening show. Tonight we have a special broadcast for you. Conclusion. I don't know how long I've been here. The clocks move strangely in this place. Sometimes the hands turn backwards. Other times they stop completely. All I know is that I am now part of the station. My voice keeps on transmitting, night after night, attracting other curious people like me. And if you're listening to this, it's because I somehow managed to record a true message among the lies I'm forced to tell. A warning message. If you ever get an email about strange recordings, delete it. If you ever pass by an abandoned radio station, walk away. And if some night you hear a voice on the radio calling your name and telling you your most intimate secrets, turn off the radio immediately. Because now I know, radio waves never die. And neither do we. We're transmitting. We're listening. And now, we're right next to you.